live in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm there most of the time, and my German neighbors and family members, they are steeped in education about what happened in Germany in the 1930s, and so they see what's happening with Trump and his enablers, and for them, it is chilling to see that this could possibly be happening again 90 years after it happened in Germany. So, no, it's not over the top. Unfortunately, there are millions of people that somehow seem okay with it.
Tell me when. We're now recording. So, General Ben Hodges, as always, thank you for joining us on the program. Can I just ask you this to begin with? As we can all see, the American election is getting more and more raw, as if that were possible. And now some of America's top military figures are speaking out in really quite startling terms. We have General John Kelly, who served as Donald Trump's chief of staff. He is saying that Donald Trump, and I'm quoting now, falls into the general definition of fascist. And we have heard that General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he told the celebrated journalist Bob Woodward that Trump is fascist to the core. Can that sort of comment, General, can that be justified for top-level military figures like General Kelly and General Milley to speak out in that way?
Well, keep in mind, of course, Mark Milley and John Kelly are retired general officers, and
Yeah,
so there is a different sort of uh, tradition about retired flag officers, generals, and admirals speaking out versus obviously where it's inappropriate and incorrect for them to say something like this while they are still in uniform. But I
indeed.
think it is important that people like them, with their experience and credibility and the proximity to the former president, that they do speak out.
These were very strong words, fascist to the core, meeting the definition of a fascist. Does that seem over the top to you, or do you agree with what your former colleagues are saying?
It only seems late, not over the top. Look,
Indeed.
I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm there most of the time, and my German neighbors and family members, they are steeped in education about what happened in Germany in the 1930s, and so they see what's happening with Trump and his enablers, and for them, it is chilling to see that this could possibly be happening again 90 years after it happened in Germany. So, no, it's not over the top. Unfortunately, there are millions of people that somehow seem okay with it.
Okay, so that again is a very strong expression of opinion. To draw a parallel with Germany in the 1930s, the rise of the National Socialist Party under Adolf Hitler, the Nazis. That's about as strong as you can get. And you say what you said with no hesitation. So how do you justify that in America, which has checks and balances, which support democracy, we're told?
Yeah, well, you're right, John, and I think probably until about 2 years ago, I would have never thought it was possible, because I always had so much confidence in the Supreme Court that while I didn't agree with every court ruling over the past decades, I never questioned for a second that they would come down on the side of somebody like Trump, where immunity for a president. I mean, that hit me like a ton of bricks, that somehow a president could be literally above the law. And that's only because the Supreme Court made that decision when they didn't even have to. And then there have been other examples where some of our part of our judiciary has done things that seem to be enabling Trump. So that is part of what has given, I think, so many of us great concern. The other thing, of course, just use Mr. Trump's words himself. I mean, when you read the quote that General Kelly used, where Trump says, "Why I want my generals to be like Hitler's generals."
Mm.
Holy hell! How could anybody in any context think that that would be okay, or why would you want a general of the United States Army to be like somebody for the German Wehrmacht? That's why people are concerned.
Well, this is a, as it were, a powerful statement, and you are clearly right when you say a serving senior officer, a serving officer of any kind, could scarcely speak in anything like these terms. You are very familiar with the higher ranks of the American military today, not just in past years. I'm not going to ask you to name any names. It wouldn't be possible. It would, if it were the case, it would breach all sorts of confidences. Can you say to me that in the Pentagon now, in the higher ranks of the military, these kinds of fears are shared privately?
Um, First of all, I would say that you can be confident that all of us take our oath to the Constitution very seriously. It's part of the culture that we reinforce it every time a soldier is promoted or reenlists for another term, or throughout the course of the year. We will administer the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And
Yeah.
we do that so that it permeates everything that we do, and that our actions are based on the rule of law and on our Constitution. And so I think people are shocked to discover that the former president assumes or prefers that officers would, that their loyalty would be to him personally versus our tradition of specifically to the Constitution. Now, um, you're right. I wouldn't, if I knew, I would never say if there were general officers or admirals that had different views, but I do know that there is some concern that if there is a return of Trump to the White House, that many of the senior generals and admirals that are in office now would be immediately removed, sacked, and replaced. Now, when I heard this from a person whose judgment I trust, of course, the president always has the prerogative to nominate who he or she wants as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for example, or chief of the
Yes.
Army or chief of the Navy. That's always their prerogative. But to remove everybody because they would have been nominated during the Biden administration, the first thing I thought about is not only is that disruptive, but it also then puts it to mind, well, that must mean they have a litmus test in mind that whoever would be nominated by the Trump administration, that there would be some sort of litmus test to make sure that this officer would be have some sort of personal loyalty. I don't know what that litmus test would be,
Mm.
but I mean that would be implied. And never again, never in my life. I was in the Army for 38 years. Never in my life did I imagine that there would be anything like that. Now it seems entirely plausible.
So entirely plausible. There should be some sort of loyalty test for the most senior generals, admirals, flag officers in the American military. You believe? Were that to be the case, I suppose, General, the officers we're talking about would have no choice but to accede to it. I mean, they would be getting orders from the commander in chief, and he is, after all, their boss. It's their job to obey.
Well, first of all, they would have a choice. I mean, if I was in a situation where they said, "Ben, we really want you to be chief of the army or the vice chairman or something like that, but you're going to have to, we need to make sure that you agree that the last election was stolen, or that we can count on you that if the president says this, you are always going to do it." I absolutely would refuse to agree to something like that. It is our duty. It is our duty to not obey any illegal order. And
Yeah.
just because the president might have immunity doesn't mean that people who carry out his orders would have immunity. So everybody should be clear-eyed about this. Number two, I wouldn't want to belong to an institution where officers were willing to place their loyalty in the president versus to the Constitution. And in our Constitution, John, as I'm sure you and most of your listeners are familiar, Article 1 of the Constitution lays out the duties and responsibilities of the Congress. Article 2 lays out the duties and responsibilities and powers of the president. That's where in Article 2 it says the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and the Navy. Article 1 lays out specific responsibilities that the Congress has, responsibilities and authorities for regulation of the military, to provide for an army, to provide for a navy. So, yes, the president's commander in chief, but we also have, we are under congressional oversight as well. It's not just a
Mm.
unitary, the president's the boss.
Right, so you, General, would resign your commission rather than submit to a loyalty test or a demand of some sort of statement or oath of loyalty. Do you
Yeah.
believe that many generals in the Pentagon, in the U.S. Armed Services now, do you think they would feel the same way? They would resign rather than accept that kind of demand for a statement of loyalty?
I would say the ones that I know, yes. They would not accept this. I think all of us were sickened when we first started hearing President Trump talking about, these are my generals, as if we were some third world country that we're not his generals. Or just like, or when he would say, those are Obama judges, these are my judges. I mean, what an abomination, and also a clear. I don't think he really actually understands or cares about what the Constitution really says.
All right. Well, those statements could scarcely be clearer. What about your feeling and the feeling of other senior colleagues in the American military about the implications of a second term of Donald Trump for Western security and the war in Ukraine?
Yeah. So again, I want to emphasize that people should be confident that officers of the U.S. military will carry out legal orders. And while I may not like Mr. Trump as a president, if that's the will of the American people and he's the president, then
Mm,
of course people will carry out all of his legal orders. And
yeah.
they should and will do their best to try and shape policy before it becomes policy. So when we're talking about Ukraine, for example, of course, we're going to try and influence what the what that policy is, why it's so important that we support Ukraine, why it's in our interest that we support Ukraine. Um, I do worry that a Trump administration um, I don't have as much confidence that a Trump administration will continue to support Ukraine based on what he has
Mm.
said in the past and what he did in the past, whereas a Harris administration will be at least as good as what the Biden administration has done. And actually, I hope and believe it will be much more stronger and more forward leaning.
Yeah. It is also argued, certainly on Donald Trump's side, that Kamala Harris lacks the experience and the weight to face off in a meeting at a negotiating table with Vladimir Putin or President Xi of China. What do you say to that?
I, Total nonsense. President Trump, when he was the president, I think many people wonder what the heck did he and Putin ever talk about? And never have I heard him say a negative word about Putin or Xi or Kim Jong-un or Orban or any other dictator. And I think that sort of behavior does not imply somebody who's a really tough guy who could stand up to Putin or to Xi or even Orban. So, but I look at, and by the way, just to be clear, I was a Reagan Republican my entire life, and it was only after Trump's behavior uh, causing people to wonder, is America still committed to NATO? And then after January 6th, that I finally broke with that. So I want to be clear. I'm not some lifelong Democrat.
Mm.
This is a change where I changed because of his behavior. But after watching Vice President Harris and her debate performance against Trump, there's no question who I would rather have going in to sit across the table from Putin or Xi or Kim Jong Un. I'd much rather it be her.